What was once one turned into three, reconnecting with our family, a safe space to speak authentically. We raise our cups, unifying as three. We bring freedom in community, random thoughts and golden nugget treats. Welcome Three of Cups community. Let's go ahead and raise the frequency. Coming up on Three of Cups.
Well, they're supposed to be that way. Well, they're supposed to show up this way because I showed up that way. This is how they're supposed to be. If you don't hold yourself accountable for the position you put yourself in, regardless whether you were in the right or wrong, the pattern's going to keep replaying itself.
Connecting with our family, a safe
Stagnant perspectives because of observing someone in distress is actually what creates the cause for eventual rebellion when you begin to choose yourself. Why do we fall into a victimized mindset? Right? Why? Is it really because of trauma, or maybe it's a mix of trauma and expectations? Either way, I think it's both. You got the trauma aspect of reacting to a wound that probably has not been touched in a long time, and experiencing that through a situation that has brought something up to surface. Well, you're going to have a reaction that revolves you reverting to a mindset of victimizing yourself with the outcome of a situation, a connection, a relationship, or maybe just an acquaintance reaction or an acquaintance connection you maybe have had at the workplace or just in public in general. Expectations can definitely leave a trap with our minds, in my perspective, to fall into this idea that, well, they're supposed to be that way. Well, they're supposed to show up this way because I showed up that way. This is how they're supposed to be. You know, everything that I basically listed, nobody's saying you don't deserve that, right? Nobody's saying that. But to hold the expectation of something and you get disappointed by it and you fall into a victimized state about it, when really you're feeling your emotions from something that you expected to occur or be reciprocated to you, in a sense comes down to it also being your fault. So naturally we revert to a victimized mindset to avoid the accountability that we have to also place on ourselves for even putting ourselves in the position in the first place to have that basically occur. And what do I mean by that? What do I mean by that? If you don't hold yourself accountable for the position you put yourself in, regardless whether you were in the right or wrong, the pattern is going to keep replaying itself. You're not looking at the expectations you had, and maybe the expectations you had because they weren't met, because they weren't made clear to the individual that you were communicating to, it ended up turning into something sour eventually. This is where reactive behavior becomes present eventually, when you allow enough time to pass of allowing a behavior or an action to continue to go on, or maybe not be reciprocated and it continues to go on, where it's either one-sided or there's no longer a healthy dynamic. Lack of accountability is the causation of a victimized mindset. Lack of accountability and responsibility of yourself and how you chose to show up in that moment, regardless whether it was good or bad, is also what leads someone into a victimized mindset. This isn't me saying you shouldn't feel your feelings either. You should. You really should. Because suppressing them is only going to put you in a space to relive the experience again. Only this time, when you relive the experience, it's going to be rooted in the trauma that was developed internally from an emotional reaction. It's going to show up in that next experience where it's going to be a lot worse than the first one because you're now dealing with suppressed emotions and now reactive behavior from the suppression of the emotions that were suppressed in the first place. So it doesn't matter what side of the spectrum you're on. It doesn't matter how much you did for somebody or how nice you were to someone or I don't know why this happened at all. I haven't done nothing to deserve this kind of mindset. It doesn't matter. What matters is when you're reaching a space where you can tell you're entering a victimized mindset, it's because all responsibility and accountability for how you showed up in the first place is being avoided. What really should be approached here comes down to you beginning to ask yourself questions when these things occur. Asking yourself, where could I have changed how I began this favor I provided? Where could I have changed where I maybe have overgave, where I could have actually gave a little bit less and more to myself? Just going down the laundry list of itemizing the interactions to really understand that really the reaction we have that has us go into a victimized mindset is because we're running from the responsibility we have to ourselves even in those moments, which is sour. It's bittersweet. Slightly sucks because we also don't want to look at ourselves in that way. We want to be like, well, they did that. I didn't do shit. Look at them, not me. Like, that's basically like the reaction most of the time. But where does that get you? Why are you waiting for someone else to acknowledge it? Why are you waiting for someone else to acknowledge what they're aware they already did? They're not going to probably acknowledge it, and if they do, that acknowledgement is not going to be enough for you. Because really, at that point, you're waiting to then acknowledge yourself. And until you stop running from the responsibility of looking at how you could show up differently in those experiences, you're going to continue to look for others outside even that person to acknowledge your emotions from what you experienced until you acknowledge yourself. And when you do reach a point of acknowledging yourself, that's not a one-time stop. That's a gradual process. That takes time. That's not going to be an overnight eureka experience. It's a gradual process that is dependent upon the wound that has been brought to surface from the experience you went through. And everyone is going to be different in this area. But it's about starting that process. And it's about becoming self-aware of when you're shifting into that mindset. Also, this isn't me shaming victimizing or a victimizing mindset. This isn't me shaming that at all. I think it's also a natural process. Why not shift into a moment of victimizing ourselves? Why not feel through that? Do you stay in it? No. But if you see yourself shifting into it, as long as you're aware that you're not being responsible for where you could have done better or maybe where you could have showed up better for yourself, not where they could have showed up better for you, but where you could have showed up better for yourself, you will eventually shift from the victimized mindset to then a more self-accountability mindset. But that starts even in those moments when you do shift into a victimized mindset, with you being self-aware that you are aware you're not choosing to be responsible in that moment with how you could have showed up better for you. So that you are aware that when you are done feeling through those emotions, when you're done feeling your feelings, when you're done reacting to your feelings, however way you do so, that you know it's time to shift into the reflection part. Because the reflection and the accountability is the step to then apply change to what is needed so that you show up better for yourself in future connections, so you don't experience the same pattern. Because even in connections, you are still responsible for yourself. You are still responsible for your own feelings. And you are also still responsible for upholding and verbalizing what you will and will not accept in connections, but also making your boundaries pretty clear and the consequences that come with them not being honored. All of those things are a part of you showing up for yourself. It's not about the person in the connection with you showing up in those ways for you, because they got to show up for themselves too. And they're not responsible for your feelings. They're not responsible to fill a void within you that is your responsibility to fill. That's your job, as is their job, vice versa.
Up next on Three of Cups.
When you're showing up as being someone who is a natural overgiver, a nurturer to the point to where you're putting others before yourself consistently.
Random thoughts and golden nugget treats. Welcome Three of Cups.
There's a time and a place. There's a time and a place to know when to show up, but also know when to tell them you are not a therapist.
Arsa family, a safe space to speak authentically. We raise our cups, unifying.
And the reason I'm going in this area is because this example eventually leads to the victimized mindset.
Go ahead and raise the frequency.
You create codependency in connections when you constantly show up as the therapist in the connection, where the person no longer is self-reliant. They are codependent on expecting you to show up for them, where they are no longer presently aware of why they need to show up for themselves.
Raise the frequency.
Which then encourages no accountability and no responsibility for themselves. The conversations are always about problems.
Space to speak authentically. We raise our cups, unifying as three.
It's no different than stating the statement of no good deed goes undone. There is a cause and effect to every decision you make.